March 29, 1993. The Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles glittered like a palace of dreams under the California night sky. Limousines stretched for blocks, their headlights cutting through the darkness like slow-moving stars. The red carpet blazed with camera flashes, thousands of them, an endless storm of light that turned every arriving celebrity into a momentary deity. This was Oscar night, Hollywood's most sacred ritual. The night when an entire industry held its breath and waited to discover who would be crowned king. Inside the auditorium, 3,000 of the most powerful people in entertainment sat in velvet seats, their faces a carefully composed mixture of confidence and barely concealed terror. The air was thick with perfume, ambition, and the particular electricity that only exists when careers hang in the balance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tuxedos and designer gowns. Whispered conversations rose and fell like waves. Somewhere backstage, presenters rehearsed their lines one final time. The orchestra tuned their instruments, and in the 15th row, sitting perfectly still while chaos swirled around him, was a 62-year-old man who had been waiting for this moment for over 2 decades. Clint Eastwood wore his tuxedo-like armor, his silver hair swept back, his famous face carved into an expression of absolute calm. But behind those steel blue eyes, behind that legendary squint that had defined a generation of cinema, something was churning. 20 years of rejection, 20 years of being told he wasn't good enough, 20 years of critics laughing, studios doubting, colleagues dismissing him as just another actor who thought he could direct. Tonight, all of that would either be validated or destroyed. The competition was fierce. Martin Scorsese, Robert Altman, Neil Jordan, James Ivory. Real directors, the industry whispered. Artists with vision? Auteurs who had dedicated their lives to the craft. Not cowboys who picked up a camera as a hobby. Not action stars playing pretend behind the lens. Eastwood had heard it all. Every snide comment, every backhanded compliment, every dismissive review. He had heard it so many times that the words had become a kind of background music to his life. If you want to discover how this single night transformed Clint Eastwood from a dismissed actor-director into one of cinema's most respected filmmakers, how 20 years of humiliation culminated in a moment of sweet vindication, and what he said on that stage that silenced every critic who ever doubted him, stay until the end of this story. This is the tale of patience, resilience, and the quietest revenge Hollywood has ever witnessed. The story of Clint Eastwood, the director, began not in glory, but in desperation. It was 1971, and Eastwood was trapped. Trapped in the image he had created, the man with no name. Dirty Harry, the squinting gunslinger who spoke in bullets and silences. The roles had made him rich and famous beyond imagination, but they had also built a prison around him. Hollywood saw him as a product, a machine that generated box office returns, not an artist with something to say. So he took matters into his own hands. Play Misty for Me was a small psychological thriller, nothing revolutionary, but it was his. He directed it himself, learning on the job, making mistakes, pushing through. When the film was released, it made money. Not blockbuster money, but respectable returns. A success by any reasonable measure. The critics disagreed. Eastwood should stick to what he knows, wrote one prominent reviewer. Acting is clearly his ceiling. Another called the film competent but unremarkable. The work of a man who has confused pointing a camera with having vision. The message was clear and unanimous. Stay in your lane, cowboy. Leave the real filmmaking to the real filmmakers. But Eastwood didn't stop. He couldn't. There was something inside him, a need to create, to control, to tell stories his own way that refused to be silenced. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, he directed film after film. High Plains Drifter, The Outlawed Josie Wales, Bronco Billy, Honky Tonk Man, Bird. Each time the critical establishment responded with the same patronizing dismissal. Eastwood remains a capable craftsman, they would write, as if craftsmanship were an insult. Serviceable direction. Efficient but uninspired. The praise was always qualified, always hedged, always carrying the unspoken asterisk for an actor. He was good for an actor. He was talented for someone who should really just stick to performing. The ceiling they had assigned him was made of reinforced steel, and no matter how hard he pushed, it refused to break. The worst part was the silence from his peers. At industry events, established directors would nod politely and change the subject when his films came up. Awards ceremonies passed him by year after year. The Directors Guild treated him like a tourist who had wandered into a members-only club. He was making money. His films were almost always profitable, but profit, he learned, bought respect in Hollywood only when it came attached to critical validation. Without the critics, without the awards, he would always be Clint Eastwood, the actor, who also directed, never Clint Eastwood, the director, who also acted. And then, in 1983, a script landed on his desk that changed everything. Unforgiven was written by David Webb Peoples, and from the first page, Eastwood knew he was holding something special. It was a Western, yes, but not like any Western he had ever read. It was dark, brutal, morally complex. It deconstructed every myth the genre had ever built, including the myths Eastwood himself had helped create. The hero was old, broken, haunted by the violence of his past. There were no white hats, no easy answers, no redemption arcs tied up with a bow. It was, in short, a masterpiece waiting to happen. But Eastwood didn't make it. Not yet. He put the script in a drawer and left it there. For 10 years, 10 years of waiting, of aging, of letting time do its work on both himself and the material. He knew, with the instinct of a man who had spent his entire life studying the craft of storytelling, that he wasn't ready yet, that the film needed him to be older, more weathered, closer to the character he would play, that the world needed to be ready to receive it. His colleagues thought he was crazy. Agents pleaded with him to strike while the iron was hot. Studio executives questioned why he was sitting on such valuable material. But Eastwood remained silent, as he always did, trusting his gut over their noise. When he finally made Unforgiven in 1992, he was 62 years old. His face carried the weight of decades. His body moved with the careful economy of a man who had learned that energy was finite. He assembled a cast that read like a who's who of acting royalty. Gene Hackman, Morgan Freeman, Richard Harris, actors who commanded respect, who didn't sign on to vanity projects. When they read the script, when they heard Eastwood's vision, they said yes without hesitation. That alone should have told the industry something was different this time. The shoot in Alberta, Canada, was brutal. Freezing temperatures, endless mud, conditions that would have broken lesser productions, but Eastwood ran his set like a military operation. Efficient, professional, no wasted takes, no ego battles. He finished ahead of schedule and under budget, as he always did. And when he stepped behind the camera, something had shifted. The patience, the waiting, the years of quiet endurance, it had all crystallized into a clarity of vision that took everyone by surprise. The film was a revelation. Critics who had spent 20 years dismissing him suddenly found themselves without words. A masterpiece, wrote Roger Ebert, who had been lukewarm on Eastwood's directing for years. The finest Western of our generation. The same publications that had called him competent and serviceable now stumbled over themselves to praise his elegiac vision and profound meditation on violence. It was as if they had been watching a different filmmaker all along, but praise, Eastwood knew, was just words. The true test would come on Oscar night. The evening unfolded with agonizing slowness. Categories came and went. Gene Hackman won Best Supporting Actor for his terrifying portrayal of Little Bill, the sadistic sheriff. Eastwood applauded from his seat, genuinely happy for his friend and collaborator. Joel Cox won for Best Film Editing. The technical awards accumulated like small victories in a larger war. And then, finally, Jack Nicholson walked to the podium to present Best Director. The auditorium fell into a hush, so complete that you could hear the rustle of fabric, the nervous shifting of bodies and seats. Nicholson, with that famous wolfish grin, milked the moment for everything it was worth. He read the nominees slowly, savoring each name. Martin Scorsese for The Age of Innocence, Robert Altman for The Player, Neil Jordan for The Crying Game, James Ivory for Howard's End, and Clint Eastwood for Unforgiven. The camera cut to each nominee in turn. Scorsese smiled tightly. Altman looked characteristically Jordan sat rigid with hope. Ivory maintained British composure. Eastwood didn't move, didn't blink. His face was the same mask of calm he had worn in 100 showdowns, 100 confrontations, 100 moments when lesser men would have cracked. Whatever happened next, the world would not see him sweat, Nicholson opened the envelope with theatrical slowness. And the Oscar goes to... A pause that lasted an eternity. Clint Eastwood. Unforgiven, the auditorium exploded. 3,000 people rose to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very walls. The sound was overwhelming, a tidal wave of applause, of cheers, of 20 years of doubt being washed away in a single moment. Eastwood stood slowly, buttoned his jacket with hands that betrayed not a single tremor, and began the long walk to the stage. Later, witnesses would say they had never seen him move like that. There was no swagger, no triumphant stride, just a quiet, measured walk. The walk of a man who had always known this moment would come, who had simply been waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. When he reached the podium, when he held that golden statue in his hands, when he looked out at the sea of faces that had doubted him for so long, Clint Eastwood did not gloat, did not list his grievances, did not take revenge on the critics who had dismissed him, or the colleagues who had ignored him. Instead, he said simply, "This is pretty good. This is all right." The audience laughed, then cheered again. It was such a perfectly Eastwood response, understated, dry, revealing nothing while somehow saying everything. 20 years of struggle, compressed into 7 words and a slight smile. But the night wasn't over when the final award came. Best Picture and Unforgiven was announced as the winner. Eastwood returned to the stage for the second time. This time, something different flickered across his face, something that might have been emotion quickly suppressed. He thanked the cast and crew, thanked Warner Brothers for believing in the project, thanked the Academy for the recognition, and then he said something that nobody expected. "I'd like to dedicate this to Sergio Leone and Don Siegel," he said quietly. 2 directors who had shaped him, to mentors who had seen something in him that others had missed, to men who had died before they could witness this moment of vindication. The auditorium fell silent, moved by the simple grace of the tribute. The aftermath was seismic. Overnight, the narrative around Clint Eastwood shifted permanently. The same critics who had spent decades dismissing him now rushed to rewrite history, to claim they had always seen his potential, to analyze his earlier works with newfound respect. The Directors Guild, which had treated him as an outsider for so long, suddenly embraced him as an elder statesman. Young filmmakers cited him as an influence. Universities invited him to speak about his craft. But the sweetest vindication was yet to come. In 2004, Eastwood returned to the Oscars with Million Dollar Baby and won again Best Director, Best Picture. In 2006, Letters from Iwo Jima earned him another Best Director nomination. The man who had been told he would never be a real director had become one of the most honored filmmakers of his generation. When asked about those years of rejection, those decades of being dismissed, Eastwood rarely dwells on it. "You can't let what other people think determine what you do," he said in one interview. "You have to trust your own instincts and keep moving forward. The critics will catch up eventually, or they won't. Either way, you've got to make the work that matters to you." That is the lesson of Oscar night, 1993. Not revenge. Eastwood is too disciplined for revenge. Not vindication, though it was certainly that. The lesson is simpler and more profound. Persistence wins. Talent can be denied for years, even decades. The gatekeepers can mock, dismiss, underestimate, but true ability, combined with true patience, eventually breaks through every barrier. Clint Eastwood waited 20 years for the world to see what he already knew. And when the moment finally came, he didn't need to say a word. The Oscar in his hands said everything. If this story inspired you, if it reminded you that patience and persistence can overcome any obstacle, I want to hear about it. Hit that like button if you felt the tension in that auditorium. Subscribe if you want more untold stories of Hollywood triumph and tragedy. Share this with someone who's been told they can't do something. They need to hear this. And comment below. What dream are you still fighting for, even when others doubt you? Your story matters, and I want to hear it. Until next time, remember, legends aren't made in a single night. They're forged across decades of silent determination. Keep fighting. Your Oscar moment is coming.